Welcome, everybody, to the Divorce Doctor podcast. Today, I am so excited to have my friend, Karen Millon, here with us. Karen is the author of An Amazing Divorce: What You Can Do for Yourself, for Each Other, and for the Children to Achieve It. She's the host of the Healin' podcast, the place where you learn and get inspired to heal, and is now using her over 22 years of business strategy consulting and entrepreneurship education and experience, with her 15 years of healing and her candidacy for life coach certification with the ICF as a one-to-one healing and transformational life coach. She is on a mission, and I can tell you she lives this mission, to inspire and help people heal from divorce, breakups, and to eliminate roadblocks in their lives so they can thrive romantically and professionally. Karen is a feeler and a healer, and I'm so happy you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. I'm so honored.
Oh, it's such a wonderful gift to have you here, to hear your wisdom and to hear about your story. So I start the podcast always asking everyone the same question, which is, what is one word you would use to describe your divorce?
Healing.
Your word.
My word. It was an opportunity to heal.
That's what I love about your work so much, Karen, and what we're going to talk about, which is being able to take a situation that's so difficult and heal through it. So I like to point out to people on the podcast that deciding to divorce takes time. You know, it's not something that we decide simply overnight. And there's a lot of opportunity in hindsight to look back and think, oh, you know, shoulda, coulda, woulda. But I want to ask you, when did you start kind of hearing that little voice that maybe something was not going right?
Great question. I've never been asked that, so that's great. But yeah, when I heard you ask that question, I just had a vision of me crying behind or underneath the tree in my backyard. I was pregnant with my second child. And I had a history, which I learned right after getting separated, of not being heard, which was, that negative belief that just opened my eyes and just started my healing. But I wasn't heard as a child, and I wasn't heard in my marriage. So we were together, married for about 9 years, 7 years before having our first. And then I was pregnant with my second child, and we started buying art, and I was working from home, and home was my office and my home. And we were deciding to buy art and started looking at art galleries and, what we like. And we struggled a bit for like about a month choosing a design. And one day a truckload shows up with 7 pieces of art, thousands of dollars, of the same artist that I had no say, no input in my home. So this art, 7 pieces, was going to cover kitchen, living room, dining room, bedroom. And I'm like, holy cow. Like, I remember running to my backyard, getting under the tree, squishing down and bawling and feeling so unheard and so lonely and so helpless and so angry at, what do I do now? I mean, how do I leave? I mean, it was unfathomed to leave with a 2-year-old baby. And I'm pregnant. I was maybe 4 months pregnant, and I had left a very lucrative career in corporate finance to work with him in the business, which was actually great. We worked well together. So I'm like, my whole livelihood, everything is in his hands.
Yeah.
And I felt incapable of leaving. And that was 7 years before I actually left.
So that's what I was going to ask you. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, right? It's so important for people to hear. That was your moment, and it was 7 years before you left, because at 7 years later, that was the right time for you. And so I want anyone listening to know that if you just had an experience and you think, this is it, I'm finished, take your time until it's right for you. So, how did you know, Karen, 7 years later, that the time was right?
So I, about maybe 2 years after the second one was born, I started therapy. I
Mhm.
went to talk therapy for about 4 years. It's actually 6 years because my little one was 6 when we got separated. So I started therapy and just talking and venting. I was really unhappy at home
Mhm.
and I was really unhappy at work. And work was a company I had started with my older brother, and a company that I had invested a lot of money and time and resources. Was my third baby at the time. So
Mhm.
I was like super unhappy. So I had a therapist just to talk, which I found really valuable in sort of understanding what's happening, bringing the subconscious to the conscious, understanding that I was unhappy, understanding what I deserved and what I was
Mm.
unhappy about specifically, not having any monumentous changes of like, okay, I'm going to leave now. Like I was still stuck,
Mhm.
but it was very helpful to sort of understand what I needed and the source of the unhappiness.
Yeah.
So
And it was
Elizabeth,
also the first person who was modeling being heard, which you said
right,
earlier was what you had never had. Right.
right,
So the
right.
power of that, even if it didn't lead to this decision, there was a power in the process of the therapy, I imagine.
There
Right.
is a power. And I also highly recommend it just because it's taxing when you're calling your few friends and family with the same dirty laundry, plus sharing your dirty laundry is not always highly advisable, as you know, and I think you have a chapter in your book. But anyway, and then out of the blue, without ever planning it, without ever envisioning and never cheating before, I was on a business trip in Chicago, and I met a man, and he was a customer prospect, and I am super love meeting people, love getting to know you. I've been a psychologist, will want to be for my whole life. And I'm like, oh, and his email was like surgery dad. And I'm like, oh, how many kids do you have? And he just started talking, and I was trying to set him up with my best friend who was divorced and way older than I was. And I'm like, oh my God, Becky, he's so sweet. Oh my God, he's so nice. And I was actually asking him questions specifically for dating for her. And she's beside me, and he was beside his best friend or colleague at the time. And I'm like, what would you do a Saturday morning? And what would you do with your discretionary income? You have $500 to blow. What do you do with that? And every single answer he gave me was like, just wow. And
Yeah.
I worked for 25 years at the time with in male dominated. I worked in investment banking, in trucking, in air cargo, in selling to surgeons. There's 3% women there. So I was very used to in a sales capacity, and I was very used to meeting a lot of men.
Mhm.
And I had never in my life met anybody who spoke my same language, who had just the same vision and did the same things. And so after about 4 hours of talking and hearing things from his friends, like, oh, Paul has never raised his voice. I'm like, where do I sign up?
Right.
And things like that. I told Becky, I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. And I came home the very next day, Elizabeth, and I told my ex we were done. And I told them just the way it was. I'm like, listen, I had never expected this. I don't know where this is going to go. This guy could be full of air. He
Right.
could have been drunk and telling me everything I wanted to hear. But something in my gut and something in my body and my
Mm.
feeling said, I am done and I deserve better. And there's someone out there for me that is going to make me happy.
Wow.
So the
I,
very next day, I told him, and I told him who he was, name, last name, where he lived, what he looked like,
mm.
what we talked about that blew me away. And our separation date, our legal separation date, was the day I met my current husband.
Wow. So was that your husband who you were interviewing? Who you met? Surgery dad?
Yeah,
Your current husband? I
that's
didn't know
my
that part of the story. Oh my goodness.
yeah. And the best part is that my ex-husband and my husband became best friends 6 months
Oh,
after.
how did that happen?
You know, let me shock you a little more. I was 40 And I wanted a third child.
Uh-huh.
And I always wanted a third, even with my ex, and he was talking. My girls knew I wanted a third. And my husband now wanted a third girl. And we fell in love so hard, and we were so in love. And he was 51 and I was 40, and I got pregnant. Planned in that we knew that we wanted
Wow.
her, and our kids had known that we wanted
Yeah.
her, and his older daughters even knew before it happened. But only 8 months after I had left a 17-year union,
So
I
your
was
body
pregnant.
knew, though. That's what's so cool about the work that you do, right? That you can't get pregnant. I mean, you wouldn't have gotten pregnant if you weren't open to the receiving, right? So there was something where your body knew it was ready for this next step.
I had never wanted an unwanted pregnancy. I was clockwork on my everything and
Yeah.
how it happened, but it was, it was crazy. So, I mean, my ex hadn't met my husband now because
Yeah.
he was in New York. I'm in Toronto.
Mhm.
Um, and he actually had the keys to our home, my ex, and came home all the time. And we had an amazing divorce from day one. And he just came in, picked up the kids, helped himself to water, whatever he wanted. And he saw a thing of of folic acid and things, because it wasn't planned. So, and I'm 40, and like he's just like, and so he looked at this and he's like, Karen, what's this? And I'm like, you're not going to believe this. I just found this out. I'm in shock. And he was like, do you love him? I'm like, yes. Does he love you? Yes. Go for it. He's like, you know, and I was like, I'm in shock. Like, we were together for 17 years. What's my parents going to say? I mean, I stayed with my ex a lot longer because I loved his parents. I mean, this was 17 years. They were my mom and dad. They took care of me on my pregnancies because I had placenta previa with one. So my father-in-law fed me. And I'm like, what are they going to say? And my ex said, Karen, do any of these people pay your bills? Do you really care about what people say?
Wow.
You've always wanted a third. And I want you to know I'm going to love that child, whether this works out with this guy, whether we never come back together. So my ex-husband is the godfather of my child with my new husband, and he adores her. Actually, we're going away for a little honeymoon, and my ex-husband's taking care of my child all weekend, sleeping with her, like feeding her, taking her to picnics.
That's amazing, Karen. So how did both of you, it sounds like both of you have so much respect for each other, and that you released, it sounds to me like there was a release of the resentment and the frustration. Can't speak to his story, but for you, how did you do that? How did you go from, this person who doesn't listen to me and would order all this art and that frustration, to respecting him when it was time for it to end? How did you do that?
Healing. So the minute I separated, the minute I told him, like it was a Monday, March 23rd of 2013, like that date is just engraved in my head forever. The next day I booked 2 EMDR sessions a week for 3 months.
Brave girl. Wow.
It cost thousands a week. I literally stopped drinking, stopped buying clothes. Like I went deep into, oh my God.
And how did you know, just to pause you for a second, how did you know EMDR? I'm just curious if you could share that.
So I'm the mother of a therapist.
Yes, you are.
That practices EMDR.
Right.
Who's certified to the 3rd level. And she was telling me about going to therapy in my 20s. And I'm like, Mom, I don't need therapy. I went to business school. I'm in investment banking. I married a guy with 3 masters. Like just marriage is hard, like I don't need therapy. Like, and she was like, Karen, I worked a lot. I neglected you. Your father was sick when you were a child. Mom, I don't need therapy. God knows I needed a lot of therapy. So she had been telling me about EMDR. And like you, that's why I know this takes a long time for anybody to come around, because I fought it for like 15 years.
Yeah. But I love what I love also is that it was landing I like to say in the back of your head, right? It was landing somewhere when she would say it. even though you weren't ready until you were ready.
So so I did
So you
EMDR therapy,
booked
which
it. Yeah, I
I
love that.
booked it, and it was so amazing, Elizabeth, because as I'm sure you know, EMDR deals with not just going and complaining about, oh, I feel this. And it's like, this is how I feel. I'm overwhelmed. I'm not sure if I'm making the right decision. What is the negative belief behind that? And they give you a list of 20 negative beliefs.
Yeah.
I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. So
Yeah.
what resonates the most? And
Right.
in a scale of 1 to 10, how true is that for you?
Mhm.
So when I had to go through a lot of negative beliefs, hence the months of EMDR, but one of them is like, I'm not being heard.
Mhm.
And I never even knew I wasn't heard as a child. But the minute I put the machine on and they start to bilaterally
Yeah.
stimulate me, all of the emotions, all of the memories that we are
Yeah.
so good at repressing,
Yeah.
of being this child with a dad who had epilepsy and was
Mm.
so drugged to avoid epilepsies that he never played with me, he never
Mm.
spent time with me, of a mother who worked till about 8 p.m. She was a professor at a university, then
Mm.
a psychologist, with clients and marking exams all night, all weekend. She worked all the time and never gave me any time.
Right.
So I remember calling her from home, saying, my brother's bullying me. Well, that's too bad. Figure it out, figure out what you're doing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just not being heard for so long. Um,
Yeah.
and just feeling it for the very first time.
Yeah, the pain of it, right? So I want to just take a quick minute just to say to people that EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprogramming. And it is a specific protocol driven, research supported therapy for trauma and other issues. And as you're so beautifully describing, Karen, that there's a focus on limiting beliefs and how you hold them in your body. And it's such beautiful work. It's such a beautiful therapy. I'm wondering also, it's funny because you said, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I think that in some ways doing EMDR is easier than just kind of showing up and like starting to talk, right? Because there's structure, there's a protocol. Did you find that it was helpful and containing in that way for you?
I love that. And as the host of the Healing Podcast, I've had a lot of EMDR therapists saying that men love it because they don't have to talk, right? A lot of men don't want to go there and talk and be emotional,
Yeah.
but yes, it sort of desensitizes you, and then it asks you, where are you feeling it, in your chest, in my stomach. I had
Yep.
a lot of stomach pain and
Yeah.
sort of in the groin.
Yeah.
And when the therapist asked, what's showing up, I would say, I have this memory of my brother bullying me and calling my mom and she's not available. But you don't have to talk. You don't even have to share it, but you
Right.
feel it, and tears are always there and you're
Right.
feeling it. And then once you're kind of there and you cried for a bit, it's like, okay, let's talk to that inner child. You're
Mhm.
now 42, at the time. And, what would you tell that little Karen who was 6 and neglected and, calling her mom and no one was answering and she felt trapped? And then you kind of reparent your inner child.
Yeah. And what I love about this too, I'm thinking is a lot of people might say, I might think, like, I know my narrative. I know my story. I know my father was this way, or my mother was this way, or my sister. But it's really different knowing in the cerebral cortex and knowing in your body. And what EMDR allows you and somatic work allows you is to drop into the actual physiological experience of that traumatic time. And I know when I've done this work, I leave the session sometimes and I think it's as if I just relived it. Like I know I didn't because I'm an adult, but it feels like you did. Did you have that experience too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's hard work. I mean, when you book an EMDR session, there's nothing else on your agenda. You're
Yeah.
not working, you're not taking care of a play date. You're going home and crying and feeling it and reprocess.
Yeah.
It's really hard because you do feel it. I mean, we are amazing at repressing. And like you said, just because we understand it at a cognitive level, I said that
Mhm.
my whole life. Like, yeah, my dad
Yeah.
worked too much. My dad told me when I was 15, Karen, I don't remember your childhood. I'm so sorry, but I love you now. And like, that I knew that, and I could talk about it But to actually feel it and actually remember it was like, wow. And I have to tell you, through the podcast and interviewing some hypnotherapists, you introduced me to Janet Philbin.
Yes.
I did 3 sessions with her, and oh my God, do you feel it harder?
Ooh, I
Do
got to
you
do that.
you know what, Elizabeth? It's interesting because I actually talked about my phobia of subways and being in New York City and all the homelessness, and I had done so much EMDR about my brother bullying me that I thought I was healed there. And it healed me enough that I quit my job with him and put up a structure and changed my life and sort of, so it was really fundamental. But when I did hypnosis, I was really scared because I thought something horrific happened to me in the 0 to 6 years in the nonverbal stage, or maybe in another life. I was gang raped in India. Who knows?
Right.
Because my fear was like, I literally sweat and get panic attacks. And the vision was, as she induced me or, put me in hypnosis through meditation, my brother hitting me in the head every day, all the time, at breakfast, watching TV, like with no protection, with no warning. So I felt unsafe in my own home. And that's what caused, a lot of my, PTSD of, I felt it in Canada. It's like one of the safest countries in the world, 100 homicides a year. And I didn't go downtown.
Right.
I
The
stayed home.
hypervigilance, right? The
Right.
hypervigilance from the past that is now playing out in the present. And I'm so glad you're bringing this up, right? Because you're talking about something that happened to you as a child that you needed to work through so that you could process your divorce, which is happening in the present, more better in some ways, which is amazing, right?
So what happened with that process, Elizabeth, which was life-changing, was that you go from being the victim and, oh, I was married to a narcissist and he was so egotistic and he did what he wanted, he never heard me, to like, whoa, I chose to marry him. I chose to stay. And he will be him. And I tried to change him for 17 years and I couldn't, and I'm done changing him. But I am powerful because I'm healing, because this stuff will never happen to me again. I am never going to be with someone who doesn't hear me. I am never going to do any job, anything where I'm not heard. And the empowerment takes you out of that victim, takes you out of the anger, takes you out of the bitterness. And it also gave me a lot of empathy for me because I felt really guilty, right? I'm breaking my kid's heart. Right? They're crying. And my ex was crying, right? Like it was not an easy thing to let go of me. I'm a good person, and he did, obviously he's like, can we make it work? And I go to therapy. So in that moment, he went to therapy with EFT, because one of emotionally focused therapy, because one of the things I've always told him was that we are not connected. I don't feel emotionally safe with you when you're always criticizing me because I'm late or disorganized. I don't feel safe, and that affects everything. We slept in separate bedrooms for 7 years, only because he wanted to sleep with the light on and the TV on, and I needed to sleep in the dark. And we were lucky to have a big home with different bedrooms. So I'm like, hey, that's my room. And so we had no attachment. And so he went to that therapy and he came back to me saying like, oh my God, Karen, I take full responsibility for what happened.
Wow.
I let you down. I let our kids down. I didn't hear you. But it was therapy. It was this therapies. And Elizabeth, that's why I'm doing the podcast, to talk about every single therapy out there.
Right.
To see what works for you might not work for me. Like, we all have different traumas. We all, not everyone needs EMDR.
Right.
My stuff was complex trauma. And that's my mission, because just going to therapy and like, instead of putting your gloves on and getting the pit bull lawyer and fighting and worrying about money and parenting schedules, and focus on you, and that healing was so pivotal for me and for him.
Both of you. Well, that's such a beautiful story, right? That and I could, we align so much on this. I totally agree. The only person you can change is yourself, and focusing on yourself and healing yourself will help you through the whole process of divorce. And I love your story. I don't hear it that often of him doing that too. And that I want people to know that very often people think, I want to send my ex to therapy so they'll change. In your circumstance is a perfect one. You both showed up and thought, oof, this is why it didn't work. I mean, you understand through the therapy why it didn't work. You take responsibility, and then you find what will work for you. So what's the thing that happened for you that you couldn't see coming that really amazed you about your divorce? Something that surprised you in the positive.
The biggest surprise for me, which was really sad, and I cried a lot after, was that I never felt loved in 17 years, and I only felt loved after my divorce.
From your ex?
From my ex. I never, and I was so heartbroken that he had lost me, that he was suffering so much for losing me, but I was done. I mean, 17 years was enough.
Yeah.
And I could not take the risk of him not changing, or him going back, or him going back to his old patterns, or not.
Right.
And I had met someone who was my soulmate in every way. Like, even, every phone interaction I had with him was like, he had a therapist. He had been in therapy forever. He was sharing with me, my current husband's like, you know what? I just found out someone's making a lot more than I am. I'm afraid of asking for a raise. I'm like, hey, go to Jenny and talk to her about that. Next day, Elizabeth, I'm calling him and I'm like, hey, where are you going? It's like, I'm going to my therapist. I'm going to talk to her about it. I'm like, oh, where have you been all my life? Like, I was unheard for 17 years.
I know.
Oh, my husband now, like, hey, why don't we stay in this hotel versus that hotel? It's like everything. Like, he heard me.
Yes. I remember when
languages, and that's also what, after the healing, me and my ex became very close, because we were just like, we've learned so much and we healed so much, but we were still very, very different people.
Well, I'm so glad you're bringing that up, because I think, some people might be listening and hear and think, oh, but he wanted you back, or he was ready to change. And I think, while that's a beautiful gift, it's not enough all the time.
Right.
We need to really be in sync, connected, love language, as you said, wise in a way. And you can still love the other person and not live with them or partner up with them, I guess. Right.
And that's exactly where we are today. And I cried over that fact, even when my baby was born with another man, because he was there when at the hospital, he came to see the baby, and we wanted to have a baby. And I'm like, wow, I wish it wasn't too late. I wish I was just completely out of love, completely spent, completely done. And I was so happy and so blessed by his awakening and his healing. And, I could do anything for him to be happy. And we're very good friends. Everybody knows that he's like a brother. If he's in the hospital, I'm there beside him. We help each other out in every way.
Right. It's so beautiful. And it's such
but we have, and part of the many also that added to not just being heard, and was that we were very different people. Like, he wakes up at 6 a.m. every Saturday. He's out of the house. He needs to eat every meal outside. And I'm an inside person.
Yeah.
Separate lives. And what he loves doing, I hate doing.
Right.
What I love doing, he hates doing. Right. And our love languages are, and we read that book when we were married in the 90s, the love languages. And I'm like, Anthony, my love languages are touch and acts of services. Hug me a lot, touch me, grab me, and do the dishes, and you'll get laid every night. Like, it's just easy. Like, and his is words and gifts. So sadly, he told me I love you every day on email, on text, and he bought me stuff, and he bought me gifts, and that would only infuriate me. I'm like, what does saying I love you mean when I have 2 kids that haven't been showered, the dishes are not done, the dogs are not walked, and I'm exhausted, and I worked all day? What? Anybody can love me. The homeless guy in the corner can love me. What's not to love? You know what I mean? Like, I don't need you to tell me you love me. And we fought about that. And gifts. I'm a saver. I like to save. I like to feel, that's whatever another
Another
trauma I need to heal. Money. But he would like, oh, I bought you a Louis Vuitton. I'm like, I don't need that. I have one. I don't need to,
right,
I don't need
right,
3 sweaters of the same color. Like
right.
I just don't. And so we would,
Yeah.
and that's who he is today. And there's nothing wrong with it. And he
Well, that's what
deserves
I
it.
love. You're just talking about it with such a non-judgmental stance. You're talking about it as he is this person, I am this person. And I talk a lot about, not putting a square peg in a round hole, like not trying to force it. And that's really what you decided, and that you can even be closer now because you're not trying to force it, which I think is such a special message. So I want to ask you the last question I ask everyone on the podcast, which is, so if you had the opportunity to go back now as you're in your adult self to that woman who was crying under the tree after the art came, and tap her on the shoulder, what would you say to her?
You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. This is the beginning of the journey, you know. I think we all have to hit rock bottom to be like, enough is enough. I love how you say in your book, it took you sitting in the floor crying, like, whoa, like enough is enough. Like um, so yeah, we are going to be okay. But, focusing on healing, it's really important with whoever you want to do it with, in any way, with whatever modality,
Yeah.
is a start. And inspiring people to heal is just my thing.
Well, I'm so great. First of all, I just want to say that so many people on this podcast have the same reflection, which is you can make it, you're going to be okay. Right. And so the reason we have this podcast is to remind people that you are going to be okay, that our stories are not unique. We just are sharing these stories of healing. And so please tell people how they can find you and hear about your amazing work and your fabulous podcast.
Thank you, sweetie. They can find me at healing.net, healing without the G. So heal in, HEALIN.net, or on Instagram at healing with Karen.
And your podcast is healing. It is amazing. I highly recommend it. You can get it wherever there are podcasts. And I want to thank you as a therapist, as a healing professional, for making therapy accessible to people, for talking about it, for bringing it out into the light, taking it from our, I think kind of white patriarchal ivory tower and bringing it to people. I want to thank you so much for that, Karen.
Thank you for what you're doing. You're awesome.
It's my honor and my pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy that you were here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.